Test. Okay. So we have a couple of questions we're going to start off with that we already have. You can pass your questions to the middle. We're going to collect them and do our best to sort of get all the redundancies out. And with that, we will go.
I'm beginning to think that maybe we need to pass the mic around. I didn't anticipate this many people. It's going to be interesting. Let me start with one question that I'd already received, okay? And I don't know who feels this. What about the housing developments planned for Pinecrest Golf Course? City Council approved mud-based something on plans to meet a 100-year flood plan. Does that make sense? Sure. Okay.
Sorry.
So that's a difficult situation. They're following every criteria and every regulation that has been established to have a level playing field across the county and across the city for development. They were following city regulations and were done in accordance with the city regulations. Many of you are aware, I'm sure, that the city has adopted some new regulations that will go into effect September 1st. It would establish a higher elevation upon which the finished floor slabs have to be built for new development or for redevelopment. But the tough message about that particular development is that they're doing it in accordance with the current regulations that exist in the city.
Thank you. What are the city, county, state, and federal government doing to build a third reservoir west of Highway 6 and north of I-10?
Sure, so that one's probably me as well. So again, I'm Alan Black, the Director of Engineering at Harris County Flood Control District. So all of the projects that we build through our CIP, they're designed out of my group. I have a number of different departments based on the types of work. A third reservoir is not an effort that flood control would be in the lead on. We would be a local partner. That actually, being that local partner, is the reason that Flood Control District was formed in 1937. As the reservoirs were built by the Corps of Engineers, we were the local partner to help facilitate that. But they are in the lead, and that is what our expectations would be for a third reservoir as well, is that would be a Corps-led effort with flood control part of the study. It starts with a study to establish what needs to be done, how it can be done, and how it can work. And then it would be appropriately funded, hopefully through Congress, to go to construction with us as their local partner.
Okay. Can you please tell us the budget requests you have submitted to prevent and repeat of what we experienced after the dam released? And also, I'm having trouble reading these. This is the problem. Can we begin with this first part?
Sure, no problem. So and that's a real tough message, and I hope that part of what Jeff presented here tonight illustrated the magnitude of a Harvey event. There is no feasible design that could be put in the ground that would protect people from a Harvey storm. It could, I don't know how many times, make your property taxes 100 times higher. That's how much money it would cost to try and dig that much hole in the ground, buy out that many homes. It's not realistic to try and protect against a 20,000-year return frequency. But what we can do is start putting together a combination of projects that maybe there's not one smoking gun that solves all the problems, but in tandem start to make it better, start to address some of those higher frequency events. Some of the current efforts that we have underway, we have some, and I'm sure a lot of y'all saw us present previously on our linear detention efforts in Terry Hershey Park on the south side. So that also is not a smoking gun project that will cure some Harvey event or a 100-year event. But it can provide mitigating volume for partnership projects with the City of Houston. We're working on an interlocal agreement with the City of Houston whereupon they'll buy some of the volume that we excavate as linear detention, and they can use that as mitigation for some of the local neighborhood drainage improvement projects that they have planned for the area. So that will help the water that falls on a higher frequency event in these areas that still causes localized flooding to allow to get that water out to Buffalo a little bit quicker. So then you start to talk about longer term. What are some of the other projects that could be accomplished? There have been, and I'll go ahead and address this head on, there have been a lot of comments that we've received asking about the possibility of channelizing Buffalo Bayou downstream of Beltway 8. That is truly a non-feasible, economically unfeasible project. I've started to do a little back of the napkin on that to say, what orders of magnitude might that be? I stopped, when I was looking at what the right-of-way might cost, I stopped when I got to about $500 million. So you all have seen today, hopefully, that Commissioners Court did adopt the resolution to hold the August 25th bond election at no more than $2.5 billion. So we've got projects all across the county and all 23 watersheds. We're now calling Halls Bayou a watershed. And we're having meetings set up in every one of those watersheds to seek feedback from everybody who will come and talk about the flooding problems, the suggestions they may have, that we can then incorporate into how we can proceed with executing this $2.5 billion bond program should it pass in August.
Why weren't individual neighborhoods notified before the dam's water was let out?
I'll take that one. I got mine.
Right.
With that, we're being sued, so there's only so much I can say about what all happened with the Corps of Engineers and all that. One thing that I am going to say, because a lot of this fell on me, to go out and say everything, is that obviously we can do better on our communication. So there are 3 things that we're working on right now. One is real-time, near real-time inundation mapping on our flood warning system website. It was live May 21st. So now you can go on that website, and as the water begins to come out of the channel, it will show you what is flooding. This updates every 15 minutes. Every 6 inches of change, you're going to get a new map. Because one of the biggest questions people had, especially along Buffalo, was where is the water? I don't necessarily know the elevation of my house, so the gauge elevation doesn't necessarily help me. So we've made this available now for the entire county, just not Buffalo, it's the entire county. The second thing, we are going to be, hopefully by this fall, having a customizable sign-up alerts from our flood warning system page for any of the gauges you want, where you can get whatever water level you want. So if the gauge is saying it's at bank full, it will send you a text message to your phone telling you the water is this high, or it's rained this much. Whatever you want to put in, we're putting it on you to sign up for whatever you want. You get an email or text message. And lastly, and the most important thing is, because not everybody's going to do all of those things or know where to go look, hopefully in the next 18 months, we are working with the federal government through the Office of Emergency Management. They will have the capability to draw a polygon and hit every cell phone in that polygon and send you a message if you want it or not. And had that have been in place for Harvey, we would have sent a message saying Addicks Barker releases are imminent, water will be rising, and then put some type of an action statement. So that will be in place in the next 18 months where we can draw a polygon. We could not do that for Harvey because it would have went out to every of the 4.7 million citizens in Harris County. We could only do it at the county-wide level. So hopefully when we get that polygon drawing technology, which again should be in the next 18 months, we can target specific areas. We can even get down to the neighborhood level. And the other thing we're going to do, which we did with Harvey, but probably not as much as we should have or could have, is utilize the Nextdoor neighborhood network. A lot of people go to Nextdoor, and we can specifically target specific neighborhoods that way. Because one of the difficult things that we had with Harvey was the large number of neighborhoods. It just wasn't Buffalo. You have to imagine the number of neighborhoods across this entire county that needed specific information for those neighborhoods. So I think that helps answer what we're going to be doing going forward to get those communications out.
Would you like to ask your question? Is there anybody here who would like to? Okay. It's very clear, though, this one. What is being done to keep additional construction from contributing to future flooding?
Sure. So there are county criteria and city criteria for new development. It's very stringent. One of the things that goes largely unnoticed or unpublished post-Harvey is that the new development criteria works. Out in unincorporated Harris County, this is outside of the city of Houston, in unincorporated Harris County, there were only 500 homes that were built after 2007 that flooded. 2007 is when the most recent criteria were adopted for development in unincorporated Harris County. So the main message that we're trying to get out there is that our existing development criteria, as modified recently to try and acknowledge some of the higher rainfall intensities, and the detention that is required for those new developments, it works. So the modeling that is put together anytime a new development is being proposed. So that developer owns 100 acres, so he has to run a hydrologic analysis that says how much water leaves that site before he developed. Before he developed the project, this much water will leave at this rate. And he is not allowed to exceed that after he develops. That's why these new developments have large detention basins. They're designed to capture that water, that, yes, it runs off of the driveways faster, but then it gets captured in the detention basin, and that has a very small pipe that outfalls into the main channel. So the water is slowed down before it gets into the channel.
Okay.
That was my question.
Sure.
Maybe I didn't clarify. So one, the question wasn't about the new ones not being built higher. It's about being in general, as your second part said. And I'm asking this because I own a home that backs up in Memorial Thicket to where they took our wetlands that were designated, well, we were always told it was a wetlands. And the developer came through and plowed it all down and put in 3-story townhouses and massive apartment buildings in what used to be doing a tremendous amount. We fought it like crazy, but all they had to do was put in a really deep basement that took some water and then do mitigation somewhere else equal to 40% of what they were causing to happen on our property, and then our property got 3.5 feet of flooding. So I think something needs to change, and that was just done in 2014. So something has to be changed, because if we keep doing that all over the city, it's just going to keep getting worse and worse. Thanks.
So I go back to my comment about not one smoking gun for the cure for a lot of these problems. And part of that is illustrated in your description of the wetlands. Yes, wetlands do provide a small amount of, effectively it's detention. It holds water back. It keeps water from getting into a system. But wetlands cannot keep up with the rate of rainfall that we have been experiencing over the last couple of years. So where a wetland might be able to capture that first inch of water, after that first inch is used up, there's nowhere for the next inch of rain to go. And so I want to try and manage the expectation that the use or the filling of those wetlands may or may not have been the reason. I would argue they were not the sole reason that may have happened. They also have, developers, when they fill in wetlands, do have to go through mitigation permits through the Corps of Engineers to make sure that the quality of water that's being handled through those wetlands is being restored in a similar manner. But again, those wetlands, they have a limited capacity, and they can't keep all of that. But back to...
You do this all over the city, is my point.
You know, we don't have zoning. We don't have zoning, so we're ending up with a lot of things being built on land that could absorb the water? And how does that get direct, you know?
Sure, and that's where I go to what the actual development criteria state, whether you're in the city or in the county. You have to have a mitigation plan to make sure that the water that leaves your property does not impact your neighbors. We are in a no-rise community.
Somewhere else.
Sorry?
What they did was they did their mitigation elsewhere. They did a little bit there, but the bulk of it, they paid to have mitigation done somewhere else so that they could still cover that whole area with concrete.
And I'm not familiar with that particular circumstance. I would have to look into that. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm dodging the question, so I do want to request that you provide that feedback. So I'm going to get back to a minute for the bond program, where we have a very large, robust communications effort planned to try and get out to the community across all 23 watersheds. And part of that is through our bond program website. So if you go to flood, and there's a reason I'm telling you this, so if you go to hcfcd.org and follow the links to bond program, there's an opportunity for you to enter your name, your address, and your comments. You can upload pictures, you can upload thoughts. All of these things will be captured and incorporated and addressed in one form or another throughout the bond program. If you have a question, we will do our best to answer that question. Yes, sir. Okay.
I tried to enter that application, and after I typed everything and put my name and address, I got an error message that said, "Oh, you don't have a password," and I did that 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I don't know if your computer application is accepting my feedback. I've heard nothing back from your computer application. Twice I've been thrown out that way.
And that was a couple of weeks ago?
I did it first 3 weeks ago and then 1 week ago, and I got no reply from either comment that I put in.
Okay, if you're getting error messages and I apologize, I'm not the IS guy on this, but there are other ways to communicate with us to let us know that they're having that problem. The easiest way is to call our Citizen Service Center. The phone number is on our website. I will take that feedback back tonight and send an email to the appropriate folks to say, we're getting some error messages so that the feedback is not coming through. I believe there's also an email address that comments can be submitted to, so please try and do it that way, and at the meantime, I'll see if I can't figure out what's going on.
Okay, so I know we have a lot of questions. I have a lot of them right here. We've done our best to get the redundancies out so we can answer as many questions on as many topics as possible. So we're going to go through these as we can, and then if we have a time left over at that point, then we will open it for more questions. So the first question I have here is, were the statistics that you gave, this is for Jeff, were the statistics that you gave for the bayou levels all data from before the decision to release the water or after the release?
You talking about the high water marks?
I think so.
Yeah, that was that we collected that data after the water went down and we could access the locations. So I don't know if it's rainfall or Addicks Barker releases. It's just how high the water got. It's just the.
Okay. Next question. It seems all creeks are filled with silt, dirt, etc. Shouldn't it back up sooner, flood with less rain? What is being done and where? And won't this be much worse for those in the flood pool?
It's very difficult to keep up with the silt and sediment that accumulates in our channels. For the last 5 years, we've had a consistent level of funding of $60 million a year on CIP and $60 million for our operations and maintenance. Operations and maintenance includes systems repairs. Systems repairs is where we go and do desiltation. That's been about $10 to $12 million per year. We don't get very far with that. When events like this happen, there are other funding opportunities that do open up through disaster recovery agencies such as FEMA, National Resource Conservation Service, and so that's where we can capitalize on federal dollars to get silt and sediment out of these channels faster. We do have a fairly exhaustive desiltation program in the Addicks Reservoir. Matt, did you want to talk briefly about what that's going on? And this is something that can be rolled out on a larger scale, but it can give you an example of what we are trying to do to keep these channels free and clear.
Thank you. My name is Matt Lopez. I'm the precinct coordinator for Precinct 3 in this area. It includes Barker, Addicks, and the Buffalo watersheds, so that is something that I have some information about. Right now in the Addicks watershed, we do have a pilot program where we're desilting the tributaries that go into Addicks, and so that the water can get to the reservoir in more efficient manner. and that includes silt or any other trees or debris that's in that area. We are partnering with the Corps of Engineers to work through some of their property, but we're focusing on tributaries to the reservoir. Now, excuse me, in specifically Buffalo Bayou watershed, we have had on the main stem our contractor, our debris removal contractor, come in, and you might have seen them. We've had barges, boats, excavators going into the channel, removing trees that were fallen from the storm, so that water can move down channel faster and leave the area so it doesn't pool up and possibly cause damage. We haven't done this operation in years and years, and it takes specialized equipment, and it's a difficult task. One of the problems we're having now, we're almost done with it, but one of the problems we're having is we don't have enough water to float the boats in Buffalo right now. So that, it's too much or not enough. And, if there's some rain forecast for this weekend, it may allow us to finish up that operation. And I think if anyone's seen Buffalo, between Highway 6 all the way down to 610, there's a vast improvement in the flow of water. In the material that's been removed, we've exceeded 4,000 tons of tree debris. We're not doing any silt on Buffalo. That is not how we operate, because you can take one scoop out here and two more will fill in. The water's always shifting the silt around, and that is a different operation. It's a different permit with the Corps. Right now, we are just removing the trees, and we're almost finished with that operation right now. So, there are areas in the county where we're doing silt removal. It takes time, though, and we can't just show up with an excavator. We have to do plans. That is the life cycle of some of our operations. The first step is, survey and get plans put together so that we know where we're digging. We don't want to go too deep. If we go too deep, it's going to be a lake, and nobody wants that. If it's not deep enough, the water won't be able to get through. So we have some challenges in all of these areas, and it takes time when you're altering the environment. That's why people say, just go dig the third reservoir. Well, you can't just do that. When you make a significant change in the environment like that, you need to know what you're doing, and our job and our duty is to get it right when we do it. Now, we try our hardest to do it the right way the first time. We're human, and I think everybody understands that. But we're trying to do the best we can in those situations for the benefit of the community. So, it's been a struggle since Harvey, and like Alan was saying, our funding levels haven't changed. We have the bond coming up, and that's a vast improvement in funding for flood control. And we encourage you to go to those meetings. There will be one in Buffalo, and that announcement will be made when the date and location are solidified. It's coming up. It'll be before the bond election, so you know what we're getting into, and you can ask questions, give us feedback. I'll be there, so you'll be able to come up to me and ask me questions, or 20 other members from flood control will be there. So we really want to get out with the community on that effort so that we can do more, so that we can make more adjustments out there and improve the area for each watershed in the county.
Okay, so a lot of the questions that we have back there concern the bond election coming up. This was one of them. What are the most important projects, in your opinion, that should be paid for by the bond election?
All. I don't say that to mean it's a cop-out, but our duty is to, our mission, literally word for word, is to build flood damage reduction projects that work with appropriate regard for community and natural values. So we have taken great efforts to distribute as many projects across the county as we possibly can. $2.5 billion isn't enough, to be perfectly honest. One of the components of that bond election is about $700 million of that is intended to be leveraged towards federal funding opportunities. We hope to turn $700 million of our local dollars into another $2 billion-ish of federal money. So a $2.5 billion bond program could yield $4 to $5 billion worth of projects. Those are big, tremendous numbers that we've never done on that sort of scale over a 10 to 15 year time period before. But it's still not enough. We have high-level estimates that say, what would it take to provide a 1% level of service. That's 12 inches of rain over 24 hours across the entire county, and it's somewhere north of $35 billion. So $2.5 to $5 billion is a lot of work, and we can do a lot of good, but it doesn't cure everything for everyone, which is why we have to distribute those projects across the county so everybody gets some relief.
Next question. Are there any flood control projects that can be completed in 5 years that will actually help?
Every project actually helps. Here's a good example, is that this year was planned to be one of the greatest design years that since I've been around. I say design in that we design the projects and then we advertise them out. We had more projects and still have more projects in design than we have funding to construct them. I consider that something of a success on my part to mean when opportunities come up for somebody says, hey, found $5 million. Do you have a project? Well, absolutely we do. We got some shovel-ready projects right here. So one of the things that you could expect to see is that should a bond program pass, there are projects that will start getting advertised shortly after the bond program passes. That's how quickly we can respond. And it's because we've already had projects under design. Projects that were under design before Harvey even hit. The typical life cycle of a large capital project can range between 1.5 to 5 years. We have a large 2 detention basin project up in the Greens Bayou watershed that is being funded through disaster recovery funding that came out from Hurricane Ike. That project's under construction still. Ike was 10 years ago. So funding sometimes comes slowly, but when it does, we're prepared to implement those projects, and we have a lot of them that we're ready to move forward with very quickly.
Next question. Was there a risk of the reservoir dams failing?
No. No.
The question was there a risk of the dams failing?
No.
Why do they keep opening up?
I'm not going to be able to answer that question. Sorry.
We're still named in litigation.
Can I please say an emotional thing? You don't even have to respond. I think most of us understand the catastrophe of the event. We understand that part. What we don't get is how a press release comes out on Sunday morning at 10:30, and we basically had not much more rain that day, and they opened the gates on us that night and did not tell us what was going to happen. That's my main problem. I try not to look back. It's been a long time. But when you think what could have been, we could have moved out of the first floor in that amount of time. And I tweeted with you. I said, what is your role as Harris County Flood Control District? And you told me it was to give the impact to the people of what might happen. Obviously, you were not given the information to give it to us, and I believe that. But that is, I think, one of the most frustrating things to us. We wanted to get better and everything, but looking back at all we lost and how it could have been prevented if they had been more clear in their press release and told us exactly what was going to happen. Obviously, the Coast Guard got the message because they were at our neighborhood right by Barker Dam saying they were told it was going to be feet, not inches, while we're swimming out on pool floats. So, I'm sorry, just as an emotional response, but that's the most frustrating part of it. I just know the communication broke down somewhere.
Okay. Next question. Why does the county believe mowing or bulldozing trees along the bayou will mitigate flooding when it's been done by Allen Parkway and it still floods, mud covering concrete sidewalks, etc.?
So I believe the question is in reference to the linear detention project that we've talked about previously. This is volume. I'll start by saying I believe that every hole in the ground is a good hole in the ground. Some have bigger benefits when it comes to a particular riverine flooding issue. Some have bigger benefits when it comes to localized drainage, and some of them become a combination of both, and that's what this one is. Every little bit helps, and all projects work together to provide more flood damage reduction benefits across the county. So again, in the case of this linear detention, some of that volume will be used to provide mitigation for the storm drainage improvements that the city would like to do in these areas. Anytime the city makes improvements to their storm drainage, like making the inlets bigger, making the pipes that take the water out of the neighborhood streets faster, that creates an impact on the receiving channel, in this case Buffalo Bayou. So this volume that we're digging as part of linear detention that the city can buy or will be buying will allow to mitigate that to where as the water goes faster out of your neighborhoods, it won't cause an adverse impact on Buffalo Bayou itself. So that's why that project, we believe, will be a successful one, particularly as you look to the north side of Buffalo Bayou, within the more developed area of Terry Hershey Park. You may not be aware, but there's a significant amount of linear detention that we built in, I believe it was in the 90s. All that is very effective linear detention that works today. When the water comes up, it helps to hold the water back, and when the water goes down, it's used as part of that park. It's open areas surrounded by trees. Harris County Flood Control District plants more trees across the county than anybody else. And this is one of the obvious projects that, upon completion of our construction, we would then go in and repopulate with native species that we feel will live for a long time and provide a replacement for some of that lost vegetation.
Okay, next question. Who has checked the 10-year, 100-year, etc. rainfall predictions, and where has their work been publicized? So I think this is in terms of the flood mapping.
So our return frequencies on the rainfall were redone after Tropical Storm Allison, 2001. They became effective 2004-ish. And then the floodplain maps were redrawn based on those return frequencies, and they were effective 2007. There is a study that has been going on before Harvey called NOAA Atlas 14. And NOAA Atlas 14 will be coming out effective in September, and that has included all of what's happened since 2001 all the way up to 2017, so it includes all the storms in 15, 16, and 17. And this is for the entire state of Texas. And there is going to be a significant change in the 24-hour rainfall return frequency for Harris County. So right now it's between 12 and 13 inches. It is going to be going up to between 16, roughly between 15 and 18 inches across Harris County. Due to that very large amount, the floodplains are going to have to be remapped. And in a lot of places, the floodplains are going to likely expand because you're obviously putting in a significant more amount of water. It doesn't have anything to do with development or anything like that. You're just literally changing the input of how you map a floodplain. The other thing that since the last time the floodplains were mapped to this time is we've been able to get a lot better what we call LIDAR, that's flying an aircraft to get the elevation of the ground. We did it for the first time ever after Tropical Storm Allison. I mean, we were doing good to get plus or minus a couple feet. Now we're doing really good to get plus or minus 4 or 5 inches. So that's also going to increase the accuracy of those floodplain maps. And one thing, let me say about floodplain maps, is they're a living, dynamic map. They're not just going to be set in stone and never change, because things change, things happen, and so those maps change over time. But if I hadn't made myself clear, those maps determine flood insurance rates and the areas that are at highest risk of flooding, but you can flood outside those areas. And just to give you a timeline here, NOAA Atlas 14 comes out September-ish of this year, and I think we're on the target now for a 3-year turnaround to remap all the floodplains in Harris County, which is, the last time we did it took 6 years or so. So we're going to cut that time in half.
Next question. What steps are being taken to eliminate the bottlenecks along Buffalo Bayou between 610 and Beltway 8? And if none, how can we influence change?
I'll take them in reverse. Influence change means comments. Give your thoughts. We've received a lot of these thoughts already that people believe that the answer is to channelize or straighten the Buffalo Bayou between Beltway 8 and Highway 6. That's an enormous challenge. I get back to this, and this is again, back of the napkin, but I get back to the idea of what would it take just to have the right of way. People don't realize that Buffalo Bayou, we don't necessarily own right-of-way for the entire length of it. There are stretches of Buffalo between Beltway 8 and 610 that we have nothing. In some cases, we have a very narrow easement. Upstream upstream of Beltway 8, it's great. We've got 700 feet corridor. Downstream, at its greatest, we've got about 200 to 250. So to take the idea of channelizing means that we will have to address our environmental impacts, which means you have to acquire that much more right-of-way. And so you'd be looking at probably needing about 500, 600 feet. So you can imagine the hundreds, if not thousands, of homes that would need to be bought out to accommodate that wider channel, plus the costs that would come associated with that. When we're talking several hundred acres of prime real estate down through the area, we're probably at $500 million before we've even turned a single scoop of dirt. So that's the financial challenge of trying to implement that specific solution, which is why instead we try and focus on some of the complementary projects. There are some tributary projects that we have planned through Buffalo along that stretch that could help reduce some of the water that gets to Buffalo through detention on the tributaries that bring the water into Buffalo. The opportunity for a third reservoir could help relieve some of the pressure on the two reservoirs that might provide some additional capacity, might provide some additional support. There is a plan that's been in the plans for a while now to have a cooperative study with the Corps of Engineers to look at the operational components of the two reservoirs. Some of that could include looking at potential mitigation projects, such as people have talked about, let's make the reservoirs deeper, let's get some silt out of the reservoirs to get more volume in there. Those are things that the Corps will need to look at, but we're willing partners, and as long as Congress funds that effort, funds the Corps of Engineers share of it, we're ready to be the local partners to do that as well. So it's, again, not one project, not two projects, but it's a complementary portfolio of projects that we feel will be able to provide some relief, but it's not going to protect people from Harvey. It's not going to protect everyone from Allison, but for the lesser events, we should be able to start making some real progress.
Okay, next question. Why did the county allow construction of houses within the design pools of the reservoirs?
Well, I wasn't around when it happened, but imagine you own property and you want to develop your property. It's private property. There are established county regulations that say this is what it takes, this is what you have to do to be able to develop your property and get a permit for your property, and they followed those rules. They followed those regulations. And so nobody wants to be told what they can and can't do on their own property. Well, these individuals, they own that property, and that's what they chose to do with that. And they did it in accordance with the regulations at the time. But regulations can be changed.
So follow-up question on that, how do the regulations get changed?
So the county engineer is the lead man who drives that effort. So there was a contingency of engineers, both private and with the county and with flood control support, that started looking at, for example, the regulation changes that went into effect for Harris County on, I think it was January 1st. That's where we raised what the minimum floor slab elevation had to be for new development to the 500-year flood as opposed to the 100-year flood.
2 feet above.
Excuse me, 2 feet above, yes. And there's a lot of nuances to that. I don't have them all in my head, so I usually use a slide for it. So those changes happened as a matter of necessity, because realizing that we weren't acknowledging what had become a true 1% event. Those changes can happen without public input, but other public input can say, well, how about this? And so we can consider other regulations. You provide those comments to us. You can provide those comments to the county. We can consider those. But sometimes there's really good reasons why we can't put certain restrictions on people's property, because that could be an inverse condemnation. If we say you're not allowed to do this whatsoever at all, well, they just said, well, you just rendered my property without value, so you just took my property. So there become ramifications on certain choices that, or certain restrictions that might be placed on those properties. So things have to be looked at from both sides of the fence.
Summarizing a lot of the questions that we got is, beyond the bond elections, how can people utilize their vote to help the situation?
provide your feedback. The bond program is anticipated to be a living document. We are taking this feedback. We're trying to figure out if there are things that we've missed. We think we've got a pretty good portfolio of projects. But beyond that, it starts with your own education, understanding what watershed you live in. You guys, I think you probably all live in the Buffalo Bayou watershed. Buffalo Bayou functions a lot differently than Brays and Sims, and so that's some of the. We were talking before this meeting about some of the things that we at Flood Control are trying to do better. We're trying to communicate better, and that was a theme that went through some of the questions here today as well. Is for us to try and communicate not only what we're doing, but what y'all can do to be prepared and understand what could happen. Unfortunately, history now is the biggest communicator, and that you know that if the water starts rising in Addicks Reservoir, then we're probably going to watch all of the news stations and listen to all of the feedback that comes back from the Corps. And then beyond that is to continue to advocate for more funding, for more projects, to say that's not enough. $2.5 billion just isn't enough, Flood Control. You need to do more. Well, that starts with our elected officials and the will of the people to fund those improvements. It's going to take a long time and a lot of money to get to a higher level of protection. And we think $2.5 billion, maybe turned into $5 billion, is a great start, but we have to continue to advocate for more funding.
Next question. How is the City of Houston and Buffalo Bayou specifically prepared for hurricane season 2018?
The City of Houston, I can't necessarily speak for. Harris County Flood Control District, one of the things that we do, and I'm going to let Matt maybe provide a little bit more input on this, is can you maybe talk a little bit about what we do before every storm? What we did before Harvey and what we do before any storm that may be coming through the Gulf?
Sure. Some of the things that we on Buffalo Bayou would do is make sure that all equipment, if there's any projects going on, is removed from the channel. We try to remove whatever debris we can as quickly as we can from the area that we think will be impacted the most. We can clean storm drains or the areas that would receive water, like trash racks and that kind of thing. So there is maintenance we can quickly do to areas that need attention right before the storm. But really, what we do, the work we do for this area happens 3 months ago. You can't really react within 24 hours the way that you would like to. So we try to be diligent weeks and months ahead, and that is how we do it with removing trees, removing snags, getting Buffalo back to its appropriate condition. And so that's what we're trying to do to allow the water to move downstream. We've partnered with HOAs where we have limited property rights to get to the channel to have a temporary right entry and go through their property to get the contractor in there faster, to be more efficient and get the debris out. So we've, ever since Harvey and really before Harvey, we've been pushing on that effort to work with the villages because we know that it's an issue. Beltway 8 downstream, it's tight. And we need to get as many trees and whatever debris is in there out of there as fast as possible. And so they have worked with us in multiple different properties. And so that has, I would say, since the storm, been a vast improvement from before. Right now, the condition of the channel is it's probably better than it was before Harvey. So I think that is a success right there. And it's not something you do overnight. You can't get those logs out of there at a turn of a key. It takes time, it's dangerous, and the water levels fluctuate, especially in Buffalo. We're doing that all across the county. I think there was an article in the newspaper and it said, well, what's broken after Harvey? And the map was just red. Everything was broken. And so the things that weren't broken but needed modification, they've waited since the storm. We know that they need to be fixed or altered. We're focusing on, first, was the emergency repairs. There were slopes, there were sewer lines blown away. The city couldn't repair a sewer line until we fixed the slope. So those were the emergency repairs we focused on first, getting the city back on its feet and moving forward. And so I think Buffalo right now, in its current condition, you know, it's better than it was before Harvey, and that was the goal and the mission. And like I said earlier, we hadn't run equipment down that channel in years, the way that we have this time. Now we have twice a year, we'll go in there with airboats, and hand crews will cut it up. But that is not what we just did. We went in there and we pulled out 4,000 tons of trees. That's going to make a difference for this hurricane season and for the next.
One thing I did want to add to that, because this may have been where the original question was leading up to, was what big projects have we done since Harvey? You know how much federal dollars we've received to date to do new projects?
Yeah, that's what I'm like. How do we improve that?
It's time. And this is something that I've learned, unfortunately, a lot about in the last 8 months. So February, it took Congress until February to appropriate disaster recovery funds for infrastructure projects. So then that has to fill up all these different pots. And every one of those pots of money have different rules, different criteria that they have to go through before that money can even be released. So that's our biggest challenge. The Flood Control District has committed and obligated $27 million towards Harvey recovery and resiliency since the event that we had not planned to spend on certain efforts. We still haven't received, that's money we hadn't planned to spend on there. We had planned to spend it on this project. Well, we needed to respond to repairs. We have a $150 million investment needed just to fix the infrastructure that we currently have damaged as a result of Harvey. We should get about $100 million of that in reimbursements through NRCS and FEMA, but the other $55 million falls on flood control. So one small little example of the challenges we face in trying to seek out federal reimbursement, federal support. Today we've received about $2.5 million in direct assistance for the immediate response stuff. But there's a whole lot more to come. It just takes time to get there.
So let me make a couple comments on the overall preparation from both the city and the county standpoint and lessons learned from Harvey. One thing that's being done through Harris County is a registry of civilians that are willing to go out if needed with a boat. A little bit more of a coordinated effort than what happened with Harvey. So there's a registry that you can go and sign up for that, and you got to fill out a form and all that kind of stuff. The county and the city are working on a better sheltering operation. We had 65 shelters in Harris County for Harvey. How those shelters were established, how they were staffed, especially if the Red Cross is unable to staff a shelter because they can't get their staff to a shelter. What is that looking like? What is that plan looking like? One thing I have to say, and this is the meteorologist coming out, the next storm we have is not going to look like Harvey. For Harvey was a flood for us. It was not a hurricane for us. It was a hurricane down at Rockport and Port Aransas. But we have to be prepared for all hazards that we can face. And in this part of Harris County, in the Buffalo Bayou watershed, your hazards are going to be rainfall and flooding and wind. Do not forget about the wind part of this. Because 120 mile an hour winds across this area is going to be absolutely devastating for us. You are not going to have power. You are not going to be able to watch the TV to find out what is happening. So you need to make sure your plan has in place both what we went through with Harvey and also the other impact, which is wind. And I'm not going to talk a lot about storm surge because you're not going to be affected by storm surge up here, but that's a third aspect that we have to deal with in this area. So just remember that for every hurricane season, it's just not flooding, it's just not Harvey. There's other impacts that you need to prepare for.
Okay, so we're coming up on our last couple questions and we're almost at time. Next question, have all the broken flood gauges been repaired and or raised?
Yes, so we lost 7 gauges that were completely flooded in Harvey. We had all of those back in service in 14 days after. In areas where we can raise them, and you have to remember, we have to be able to maintain them. So I'm not going to put them 25 feet up in the air because it's dangerous for my technicians to get up there and maintain something like that. So we have to be able to maintain these at a reasonable level. The one that there's just really no option is downtown at Milam. That's a low area, it's a low bridge, there's nothing else I can put the thing on. We're gonna probably lose it. We lost it twice. We lost it Memorial Day and Harvey. But for the upstream portion, we have raised our equipment in those housings as high as we can possibly get them. I have also added a gauge at Buffalo Bayou at Piney Point. So the USGS already had a gauge there. Just last week, we put in a rain gauge with that and tied into the USGS water level. So you will have another gauge at that location. We've also added another gauge at upstream in Addicks at Clay Road and Langham Creek. So that gives you some more rainfall coverage. But like I said, we're going to get these things as high as we can get them. But for a Harvey level event to only lose 7 gauges out of 153, I think we did pretty good.
Okay, so this is the last question. Can we get the slides?
The slides are on the computer in the back. I left a copy with them, so I is there a way that y'all talk and email or?
Well, a lot of the folks here are from the community and not the church.
Okay. You're more than welcome to send me an email, and I can PDF them to you.
Okay.
Too big to email in PowerPoint, but I can PDF them.
We need to end our full session at this point. I think these guys have a couple more minutes to stand around and talk. I want to go ahead and thank the 3 of you for coming out tonight. I want to also thank all of you for coming out tonight. This is a new program here at the church where we were trying to come up with programs that are interesting and relevant to our community. We will be having these quarterly throughout the year. The next one will be sometime in September, so keep your eyes out for that. Thank you all for coming tonight.